Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Max Velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be breaking down a new storm that will be impacting the United States by the midweek that could bring the risk for some severe weather, and this could play a factor in our heat wave here in the United States. I'll give you the latest breakdown on everything that you need to know in this forecast, but let's first begin with what's happening across the United States today. We'll first begin with the central and southern plains. We have a couple areas of interesting storm activity today. We've actually had some thunderstorms rolling through areas near Kansas City during the late morning, and that's now still rolling down to the south and east during the early afternoon. Pretty impressive area of storms, all moving down to the south and east here on the infrared imagery. Pretty impressive storms. Again, we've been looking at a lot of lightning and some gusty winds. That'll start to weaken out though over the next few hours, but it will allow for a new risk for severe weather later today across areas in the Midwest. We actually could see some storms fire off of outflow boundaries, bring the risk for some damaging winds later today. I'll talk about more on that here later in this forecast. Further down to the south, we have other storms ongoing near the DFW area in North Texas. All that storm activity is moving to the east, and this will pose a threat for some isolated damaging winds over the next few hours as it moves towards Louisiana and Arkansas, but overall the risk of severe weather stays low at this time. Back up in Canada, very impressive trough still ongoing. This thing has been rolling around in Canada for the last several days. If not, it's even been at least a week since this thing has just been sitting up there in Canada, and it continues to allow more systems to literally develop up in the northeast, allowing lots of moisture. In addition to this, we're seeing lots of flooding. So really big concerns right now in the northeast. We've seen a lot of flooding over the last few days, and as well as today, we've seen a lot of flooding start to ramp up in New Hampshire, Maine, and as well as Massachusetts. Additionally, we've had a lot of tornado warnings today due to the fact that we have some shear up there. So it's really just been a mess up there. Luckily, this trough that's up in Canada will finally move off to the east over the next few days. That does mean we'll start to see that activity wind down a bit from at least this low pressure system in particular. So some good news there, but obviously too much rainfall for this region and a lot of tornado warnings. It's been a mess there again over the last few days. Now let's talk a little bit more about the smoke activity up in the Midwest. There's been a lot of wildfire smoke over the last few days. You might be wondering, when is this wildfire smoke going to go away? Because a lot of areas have been smelling it this morning, and all this activity will move off to the east over the next few days. So the low pressure system spinning up in Canada with those upper level winds will be going a little bit more off to the east, so that wildfire smoke will actually move towards the east coast. So as we go into Monday, that wildfire smoke primarily located across areas into the northeast and the east coast. Once we get into the late Monday night and early Tuesday morning, a lot of wildfire smoke can be located up in New England. So obviously the activity in New England is rain right now and flooding, and next up is going to be wildfire smoke. It really just not a whole lot of good news there overall. It's going to smell bad, and obviously the air quality will be decreasing from that as well. So definitely make sure you're limiting your outdoor time if you have any respiratory issues. Now the main point of this forecast is talking about the weather pattern upcoming for this week, because we'll have a new storm impacting the United States, and this could actually ramp up the severe weather potential in some areas. So let's kind of discuss that in detail. We'll first begin with the jet stream, and this is the upper level winds essentially. So this is what we have right now for the jet stream. It's meridional, so it's not zonal, and a zonal jet stream, by the way, is just flat. So we're looking at more of a curvature jet stream right now, and that's allowing for some more of these deepening troughs. And you'll notice back over in parts of like southern Canada, north of the Midwest, that's where our big low pressure system's located. I just showed you that on the infrared imagery, and that's what we're going to be watching here over the next couple of days as this moves on to the east. It'll continue to bring rainfall to those up in the northeast and as well as into New England, and then back down into the southwest United States. That's the heat dome, which is responsible for that record-breaking heat that is possible today in Death Valley. Death Valley is forecasted to get near 131 degrees, so if that ends up happening, that would be basically shattering records here across the entire world. The highest temperature ever recorded is 134 degrees, which did happen in Death Valley, but that was over 100 years ago, and it's questionable if that was an actual reliable measurement. So this might be the highest reliable measurement that's ever been issued, but obviously a lot of discussion there. But as we go throughout the next few days, we'll be watching for this jet stream to stay very, very meridional for the most part. That low pressure system moves slowly off to the east, and then we'll be watching our next storm in parts of southwest Canada. This will be just north of Montana, and this could be our next chance for some significant severe weather for parts of the Midwest and perhaps the Ohio Valley, and maybe as well as the Northeast. It's still a very questionable trough though, because we have to kind of see how it evolves here over the next few days. Notice though that heat dome does not move whatsoever. It's going to be sitting there down in the southwest United States, and it'll keep a lot of areas warm down here from Texas and Louisiana and anywhere on the Gulf Coast, really all the way back through the West Coast. It's going to be very hot there. Once we get to Thursday into Friday, that is when that low pressure system will be ejecting there across the Midwest. Overall, it's going to be a positively tilted trough in the upper levels. That usually means we're not really looking at a substantial severe weather outbreak, but we could be talking at least about maybe a slight risk or enhanced risk of severe weather, depending on if all the ingredients are there for a damaging wind threat, or maybe even some large hail, possibly even a couple tornadoes. The low-level jet currently being forecasted isn't the strongest we've ever seen, but it would be enough for maybe a couple tornadoes if there were to be some sort of severe weather event. But notice the strong upper-level wind still across the Midwest and back through the Ohio Valley. That can increase the longevity of some supercells. So that's definitely a critical little point there. And then once we get to next weekend, that high-pressure system will continue to build in across the western half of the United States, and meridional jet stream does continue, and we'll have a lot of curvature. So our next storm as we go into next week could also be quite intense, but again, as we go further on, it gets a lot more uncertain in terms of our forecastability. Now, looking at the jet stream isn't necessarily everything in terms of the weather pattern, so let's look at the surface future radar as we go throughout the next few days, and we'll begin with Monday. Overall, Monday looks to be quite dry across most of the United States. We're really not looking at a whole lot of shower and storm activity. High pressure at the surface in the Midwest should keep things dry, but notice our next storm back up into southern Canada. Again, that's going to be something to watch for once we get closer to Wednesday into Thursday. So going into Tuesday, we'll have to watch another trough actually eject down through the Central Plains. This could bring the threat for some severe weather across parts of the Central Plains and even perhaps into parts of the Ohio Valley. This will be something to watch for going to late Tuesday morning as well as into the afternoon hours. Once we go into Wednesday, notice again that little trough back down there in the Ohio Valley. That could bring at least some rainfall, but maybe a little bit of severe weather. And then that trough back up into southern Canada, that'll start to move down to the south and southeast toward the Midwest, which again could maybe bring some severe weather, but the question is, will there be enough ingredients? Will the atmosphere be destabilized enough? Will we have enough instability essentially? That all is a bit of a question mark with this sort of system, because again, it's going to be positively tilted, and those ones are not necessarily known for producing significant severe weather. They do produce some severe weather occasionally, but they're not usually producing those significant severe weather outbreaks. Once we get closer to Friday and to Saturday, this will move off to the east. We'll be watching for rainfall in the northeast, and this could actually position itself to be a bit more of a significant severe weather producer, possibly even in the northeast, if it ends up becoming a bit more negatively tilted. It has a bit more of a pull out of the south with some stronger shear, and as well as the potential for a lot more moisture. So we'll have to watch that potential, but again, that is several days out. That is almost 7 days out from now, so things are obviously bound to change here over the next several days. In terms of the temperatures across the United States, cooler weather for the next few days in the Midwest overall, from average at least, and then back down the southern plains, very hot due to the heat dome that we have down there. Once we get into next weekend, things do remain a bit cooler across most of the central plains and back through the Midwest, but overall surrounding areas going to be dealing with at least some sort of above average temperatures from the west coast all the way back through the southern plains and as well as into the northeast. So overall, definitely going to stay warm there. Climate Prediction Center on board with that same sort of forecast, currently forecasting at least potential of below average temperatures across the Midwest and central plains. Elsewhere, we are likely going to be seeing some above average temperatures. That includes areas like Florida and especially the west coast as well. Now let's talk more about the severe weather potential for the next several days. We'll begin with today. There's currently a couple main areas to watch for. Back up in the northeast, we still have a low chance for tornadoes through the early afternoon, so maybe an isolated tornado or two from here, but otherwise that risk should start to go down a little bit over the next few hours. Back through the Midwest and the central plains, this is an area to watch for some damaging winds this afternoon and evening, and I might go live for this, so just make sure you're subscribed down below and click the bell icon so you're notified if and when I go live. But overall, the risk of severe weather does look quite low today. Main reason why is because a lot of these storms will be outflow driven, so that should limit the tornado risk. It should be primarily just some large hail and damaging winds. Currently, the large hail concern is primarily focused there across central Kansas out of a couple of significant supercells this afternoon, but overall, the damaging wind threat is the same across the board. Only difference is we don't have any hatched areas, so we're just looking at damaging winds up to about 65 to maybe 70 miles per hour. So again, nothing too crazy today. Here's the timing for today. So we'll be watching some storms roll through Illinois later this afternoon. Most of these will just be producing damaging winds. They could go all the way to Indiana, maybe even Ohio, but they shouldn't really be producing much severe weather by then, just some gusty winds and lightning. And then once we go closer to the late evening, maybe a couple more storms developing close to the Chicago metro area or maybe in the suburbs, but again, overall severe weather really not expected there. Then during the overnight hours, things will clear out. We could still be watching some storms in central and southern Illinois, but overall the risk of that does remain low at this time. Monday's risk of severe weather may grow a bit. For right now, though, when I'm recording this forecast, we do have a slight risk of severe weather back through areas in South Dakota and Nebraska. A couple marginal risks of severe weather, one in Ohio and Kentucky, again, the other one in the central and northern plains, and then one back up in Montana for mainly damaging winds and as well as, again, a little bit maybe of large hail. And so for your timing going into Monday, we'll be watching for some storms during the morning hours down in southern Illinois. This could be where we extend a little bit of a marginal risk of severe weather for perhaps some damaging winds if this all ends up up forming. This would perhaps be outflow driven, but again, damaging winds, maybe a little bit of large hail out of that. And then during the late afternoon and evening hours, we'll be watching for more storm activity near Illinois and Indiana. So something to watch for. Again, we might see the risk increase, but we'll see what happens from the Storm Prediction Center. Back into areas in the Central Plains, we'll be watching for some storms going into the morning hours again tomorrow. This is also an area that's not in a risk of severe weather, but perhaps could be issued into one. And once we go through the late afternoon and evening, we'll actually be watching for a cluster of storms to develop during the late evening back up in South Dakota. This would push down to the south, producing some damaging winds and also a lot of heavy rain that could pose a flash flooding risk. Then going into tossing trampolines on Tacos Tuesday, we currently do have a marginal risk of severe weather back through Illinois. This is the other area that we're going to have to watch for going into Tuesday. We'll talk about more on this though in our next forecast. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to like the button down below and subscribe if you've not already.